Hey folks, I wanted to present the assignment to you. It's called Cultural Analysis / Prospectus. It's a challenging assignment because I want you to work with the concepts and theories that we've been talking about over the last 3 lectures. They come from chapters 6 on rhetoric and culture and chapter 7 on representation and its audience. So I wanted to take a look at the assignment with you and give you some advice before you jump into it. So let's take a look at this assignment here. It comes to 750 words. You can go over up to 1,000 if you wish. It's a draft type of assignment, so I'm not looking for APA format. I'm really looking for brilliant analysis and great use of the concepts from our course as you apply them to the television show that you've chosen to work on this semester. So the way we're going to do this is I ask you to choose a question, one question about rhetoric, one question drawn from cultural analysis, and one question drawn from representation. So each of those topics has a set of questions. For instance, here at rhetoric, you might want to be working on the question, what personal, cultural, and national values are inherent in the program or in certain characters and issues? How are the values communicated? So you might choose that one from the selection of questions you could ask about rhetoric. And then you go on and say, okay, now which one am I going to pick from cultural analysis? So what meanings are preferred by the programs? What are the dominant meanings, which relates out to the theory of reception that Stuart Hall gave us. And I'm going to ask you to pick, one question from representation. Are people represented in categories of gender, race, ethnicity, age, occupation, etc.? Are there differences presented positively or negatively? So that's a question which is going to lead you to an analysis of stereotypes. So pick those 3 questions, ask them of the episode that you're working on. If you want, you can extend your analysis to a couple of episodes. If one of them works for rhetoric, but another one is better for representation, go right ahead. That's okay. I'm going to ask you to read part of chapter 9 from the textbook before we begin this assignment. And so you'll find chapter 9 is full of great questions and ideas about analysis. So here it is. It starts on page 204 of your textbook. It describes what analysis is, and then you'll see that many of the questions that I am asking you to work on are actually drawn from here. So that's from chapter 9 of your textbook, which I'm assigning you to read before you get into this cultural analysis assignment. Okay, just a word about why this is important and why it's probably challenging within the framework of the course. I mean, in your earlier essay, you wrote about things like narrative and characters, which are pretty familiar to us. I did ask you to use theories which were probably not familiar before you took the course. Now, this section is all about how television exists within a sociocultural context where there are different groups with different kinds of power, and those are represented within a television show. And that's not something that we tend to think about too much because we just accept the social world as it is. But we're television critics, and so our view of television extends beyond just the television text itself into the culture. So these 3 theoretical perspectives deal not just with television, but also with social and cultural power. So do think about that. Very quickly, when we're talking about rhetoric, rhetoric is the study of why television is persuasive. So you could look at why a genre of television is persuasive. If it's a documentary, for instance, it has a claim to tell us the truth about something. You can also look within a television show for moments within a show in which characters are particularly persuasive. So I showed you how Don Draper from Mad Men was an expert in terms of rhetoric when he worked, okay? So those are just a couple of ideas about rhetoric. It's looking at how television is persuasive. Moving on to cultural analysis. Cultural analysis is, sees culture and society as containing different groups with different kinds of power. We're especially interested in the power to represent things on television. Cultural analysis uses the concept of ideology. That is, that there are powerful groups in society who need to have their dominance supported with ideas that we call ideology, and that television distributes those ideas. You can see different ideologies on television. So if and when you're doing cultural analysis, you're thinking about how the power of particular groups in society is supported by what you see on television, the ideas that are there. And I think the best way to approach that is with the idea that there could be different ideologies represented on television. And sometimes you will find moments on TV when different ideologies are set into conflict with each other. The sources of power might be governmental, they might be gender power, they might be class power, they might be racial power. You know, we know that there are different sources of power in society, and their ideologies may be presented within a show. Even again, you might look at a show which is, you know, a Disney show which is very strong on, you know, family bonds, and one could look at that as an ideology. You know, the conventional heterosexual nuclear family excludes some other folks who have different kinds of family arrangements, and so that may come up in a particular episode. Finally, the issue of representation, well, that leads us to the analysis of stereotypes, but also a few other things. First, a caution that all of television is representation. Every representation on TV is potentially ideologically motivated. There's an agenda behind everything. So don't just take something that appears real as to be superior than something else. In fact, question realism. I gave you the concept of real feel to get you going on that. That's the idea that some shows simply feel more real than others. It's a great thing to do to analyze how that real feel is achieved technically. Why do you feel that this show is more real than another, given that they're all television? None of them are real. And then think through, you know, what kind of ideology or power is presenting those things to us, telling us that they're real. Yeah, and then as I said, largely representation is to talk about, you know, which groups we see on television. Are they positively or negatively represented? And then also, you know, when we get into that, sometimes we do have, you know, sometimes it's a step forward to see certain groups represented. We're seeing more trans characters, more stories about trans characters on TV. That is sometimes a good thing. Sometimes it's not, you know. I remember somebody writing about Bates Motel and saying, oh, it's a real step forward. There's a trans character. I mean, they commit suicide in the end, but you know, it's still a step forward. I was like, wow, really? Was that a step forward to show, you know? So the simple fact of representing a group that is underrepresented may not necessarily be a good thing. Depends. And so that's up to you to decide and write about as well. And sometimes, you know, I'm you know, we've seen a lot of stories about empowered, you know, groups. Sometimes the empowerment is super easy, like turn them into a superhero and they can, you know, be powerful. That's kind of empty. I'd much rather see a show which picks apart, you know, the disempowerment of a character, as the example from Shrill did in the lecture on representation. You know, it's great at both showing somebody breaking away from the dominance of society, and it's also great at showing, you know, the ongoing hurt or struggle that those marginalized characters have dealing with culture. So that's just trying to say, you know, question stuff, and the fact that a group is represented now is progress in a sense. For what is being presented about them is also important. And I think television can be not just cheerleading and celebrating empowerment that may or may not actually exist in society. It can also do a great job at making us empathize with characters and experience disempowerment that they feel that they're struggling with. So those are some of the topics that you can work with on this essay about cultural analysis. And again, stick to what we have been working with in the last 3 weeks in terms of concepts. And I think this will be a very rewarding essay. All right, I look forward to reading them soon.